Well, today I am super excited because even though Kath is away with family doing some big stuff in South Africa, I get to be here with a wonderful lady. Her name is Jo. She is part of our group membership from the Brave, Strong and Fulfilled podcast. And we had a great conversation last week. And I just think I want to share it with all of our listeners. So, Jo, welcome to the Brave, Strong and Fulfilled podcast.
Thanks, Ali. I'm really excited to be here.
That's good. I'm excited. I'm nervous. I'm all the in between because look, to be fair, I don't really know you very well. We've been part of our group membership for a few months now, but you know Kath well. What's
I
your story?
do. Yeah, so I got to know Kath a few years ago. So I'm also a life coach, life and leadership coach, and did training online with Kath. So I got to spend, lucky me, a few hours every week for a number of months, learning with her some more around coaching, developing our skills, and then doing some practice sessions with her. So that's how I've got to know her.
That's fabulous. And I mean, that's a somewhat similar story to me. Although, no, to be fair, Kath was my coach to start with. And then we met together. She became my coach because I realized, hang on a second, I need a life coach. And and then when I started to do our journey, work out what I wanted to do next in my season of life, Kath was a lecturer for Neurocoaching Australia and was my lecturer for a number of months. So I think we're
There you
both pretty
go.
privileged to have her in our world in that capacity.
I think we all need life coaching. Life's complex, it's beautiful and it's messy and it's all of those things, isn't it? So,
All
yeah.
the in between. So last week, Joe, part of our group membership, we had a big conversation. There's lots going on in the lives of all of our members, and obviously, we're not going to talk about any of that today. But you brought something to the table that was super interesting. You used the word paradox, and I remember
I
sitting there
did.
going, paradox, that's interesting. And then you sort of challenged us a little bit, and we thought, this is a great conversation. So, do you want to tell
Yeah.
us a bit about what is a paradox? Where did this come from? What are we going to talk about today?
Sure, I would love to. So, I've been doing a little bit of, as we said, we often always need a bit of life coaching ourselves. And there were some things that I was struggling with, some things
Yep.
that I was kind of identifying as good in my life and some that were bad. And I was doing some reading and came across the term paradox. And what does that mean? I mean, it's something that appears to be a contradiction
Mm.
from another perspective. But from another perspective, it might not be a contradiction at all. So, for an example of that would be something that, on one hand, can be seen as being really challenging and really tough, but on the other hand, it could be something that could be really life-giving. And it just got me thinking about, I think as I was growing up, I often did attribute a label to something being as good or bad. And then you
Mm.
get sometimes stuck in the judgment of, is it good? Is it bad? And actually, it doesn't really matter. It can be both.
Yes.
And how do we embrace both? How can
Mm.
we embrace being really sad about something and allowing ourselves to feel that, but also being able to laugh and experience joy at the same time? So to me, that's what I've been journeying on in the last few weeks and really exploring those areas in my life where there are, seems like very opposite emotions, but how do I embrace both and incorporate that fully into who I am and allow myself to do that? How does that sound? Would you say it's a good description of what we were
That-
talking about?
that's incredible. That is great because that's what I had read when I literally got off our group conversation last week, Joe, and went and Googled the dictionary term of a paradox because I
Paradox,
was
yeah.
just like, what actually is and you're spot on. It's things that appear to be contradicting, but in certain circumstances can be completely possible, completely aligned. And so,
Mm.
how we started this conversation, I was saying I feel nervous, but I also feel excited about our conversation today. Nervous because this is unfamiliar. I don't know you very well, but I'm excited because, hey, I get to know you and get to do something new and different, and it is life-giving for me. So yeah, we have paradoxes in our life constantly.
All the time.
Kath will
Yeah.
often use the language, it's not black or white. Like you don't choose black or white. And in life, it can be very confusing. I know that not in the stomach, where you are sitting in that space where life is heavy and difficult. But
Mm,
then, if I stay in that space, I can see that that spirals me downhill very, 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 very quickly. And I know
yes.
there's been seasons in my life where we've gone through some really tough times as a family. And I've intentionally gone and tried to find the joy and peace and fun things because I kind of felt like it helped to balance me out a little bit, even though it made no sense.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think we often think of it being um, either or, but it can
Mm,
be and both.
both.
And it's not then to, I think often in our Western world, especially with something that evokes maybe negative, what we might see as negative emotions, grief, sadness,
Yeah.
tears, anger, frustration. I think sometimes there can be a real need to kind of, we don't want to talk about that stuff. Let's just move on. Yes, that's hard, but let's talk about the positive stuff. But I think this enables us to hold both of them because they're
Mm,
both part of us. And
yeah.
as you say, in those difficult times, um, it's okay to be really sad. It's
Mm,
okay to grieve. But in that moment, how can you also embrace those things that are gonna give us life?
yeah.
And also, I think in this book I was reading, it also talks about seasons and it actually says a time for. So there's a time for grief. Of
Hmm.
course, when we're going through tough times, there's a time to grieve, but there's also maybe a time to let go.
Yeah.
There's a time to remember and to go back and think about that person or that situation, but there's also a time to move forward and embrace what's new and not allow ourselves to get stuck.
Mm.
Mm.
That's key,
And
not to get stuck. Mm.
not to get stuck. And I also was thinking this morning, often in some of our coach training, we look at um, is is what we're experiencing life-giving? Is it resourceful?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it is resourceful to be sad,
Mm.
because it's resourceful. It's serving us because we need to allow ourselves to be
Yeah.
sad. We need to allow ourselves to be angry about a situation, but then we need to use that energy that that can evoke to move us into something else. So yeah,
Wow, that's such a beautiful picture. A picture of using that energy because often we don't know what to do with ourselves, you know?
yes, yes,
And I can
yeah.
see how this is going to be a helpful conversation and almost allow us and give us permission to do something different with all of the emotion that comes up from, I guess, perhaps the
Mm.
more negative emotions. They're not necessarily negative, but that's how we perceive them. So the anger, the fear, the frustration, the grief, all of those things, it does stir up an energy.
Yeah. Would it be okay if I share just an example that came to mind
Oh,
about how
yes, of
I've used
course.
that energy? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'd love to.
for the listeners, or you can probably tell, I have a British accent
You
still.
do.
Actually, Ali is also
I know. Can you hear my
you wouldn't
accent too?
guess. But for any of our English listeners, you probably think that I also have an Australian accent.
Potentially.
Um, but something my husband and I lived in Australia for 10 years, and but prior to that, we were in the UK and we were journeying through some really tough stuff in life. And I would say it's probably some of the hardest stuff we've ever dealt with in life. And to many outsiders, it might look like this is the worst of the worst that could happen. But where I see a paradox in that is it actually, I would also say, has been the best thing that happened.
Wow.
Because we would never we'd never considered moving to Australia, ever. It'd never been on our radar. But if what had happened in the UK didn't happen, we wouldn't have been where we are now. And I think that for me is probably one of my biggest paradoxes I've experienced is in the depth of my sorrow and despair and life wasn't where I was going, it was also the thing that allowed us as a couple to explore our future in a completely different way. So it was the worst thing that probably has ever happened in our life. It's also been the best thing that ever happened in our life. And we would not be where we are now if we hadn't experienced the worst that we experienced in the UK. And I think that's probably a really good example
It
of
is great.
how can you hold both?
Yeah.
And we don't need to dismiss that was really hard and the stuff that we dealt with in the UK. It's not to dismiss that, but it's also to say it can also be
Mm.
something that has led to flourishing and growth and a whole new future for us, which we wasn't expecting.
That's beautiful. So, would you say that you've discovered that paradox that you were explaining there from hindsight, like looking back and seeing it, or was it something you
Yes.
recognized in the moment as well
I think there were moments in the mo
in
in
that season?
when in that season there were
Mm.
moments when we could experience joy and happiness as well. Um, and that was really important for us to allow ourselves on certain days to, feel sad, to
Mm.
be in grief, and but also when things happened which brought us joy, to also not feel bad about being happy and
Yeah.
experiencing joy. So to allowing ourselves to not judge our emotions or where we're at. But I would say, so yes, I wouldn't have used the term paradox then.
Mm.
But it was, I guess, practicing that. But now looking back, I can see the bigger picture
Yeah.
and what was happening through that process. And actually in practicing that, what that's now led us onto in the future. So I think now I think about it more often.
Mm.
I think about other areas in my life where I might be experiencing the opposite
Yeah.
and not getting stuck on that, just embracing it and
Yeah.
saying, I don't need to either be through a tough season or an easy season. I can be going through both.
Both.
Yeah, and
Mm.
how and talking with people about that. So yeah.
Goodness.
Can
So,
you think of something for you, Ali, that
yeah.
resonates with you?
Yeah. So, I'm just thinking about different seasons in our life where, as a family, we've journeyed in very difficult, sort of dark seasons, and we haven't really known how to do that. And it
Mm.
could be all consuming. And I
Mm.
remember one particular time just feeling so consumed and almost a bit of a fear of what that would look like for our future if I stayed in that space of it
Yes.
feeling so consuming. So I remember my husband and I talking and intentionally deciding to find fun in that season. Didn't know that
Mm.
embracing two things at the same time was a paradox, had no idea what that meant, but I knew if I stayed or we stayed as a family in a particular season without intentionally having some sort of joy or some sort of hope to look forward to, I
Mm.
saw us really in a downhill spiral and our family like I felt like there was no hope for us. And that's a very difficult thing to say now looking back because it, choosing to find joy and we intentionally scheduled it into our life. So at the
Yes.
same time, we were still allowing ourselves, we weren't denying the fact that life was hard, but we
Yes.
were scheduling a time to intentionally go and enjoy the whole family. And so
Yes.
we felt that doing those two things, and I look back now and know that that helped us to buy the house that we're living in right now. We
Yes.
wouldn't have found this house, and we love
Mm.
this house. It wouldn't have allowed us to do a lot of the things that we've done within our family, some of the
Mm.
trips that we've made as a family. We wouldn't have had those opportunities
Mm.
had we not sort of sat in that space and intentionally worked out how do we hold both? How do we sit in a
Yes.
season of heaviness and uncertainty but have
Yes.
intentional
Yes.
joy?
And what I picked up there is you use the word intentional a number of
Mm,
times. And I think that's really key
yeah,
because we do have a choice.
yeah,
And it's not therefore denying what we're going through. But what I heard there is even within your season, you made an intentional choice about how much time, how much energy you were going to allow the thing that was difficult and to consume you, use that word consume, and then intentionally booking in things that would bring you joy.
yeah,
So it's not just this, I think what's helpful, it's not just this, oh, I'm really, really sad. oh, and then something just happens to you, oh, that, and you can experience joy, but actually that may happen.
Yeah, of
But
course.
actually the intentional choice to actually say, despite,
Mm,
um, and I think someone in our group last week talked about even if, you
even
know,
if.
even if I'm going through this challenge,
Mm,
I can still, even if this is happening, I can still,
yeah.
and I like that. And you mentioned about certainty and uncertain. I don't know for you, but during COVID, this for me was a good
Mm.
practice. There was so much that was uncertain in life. I didn't know if I ever was going to see my family again,
Oh, of
in the
course.
UK and all that stuff. So much was uncertain. And I found myself needing to then find things that provided certainty as
Mm,
well, just to be a bit of that balance. So much was uncertain, but I needed to give time to things that I could
mm,
provide some certainty in my life. So I like that, the intentional choice that you raised
mm,
about how much time you give something, how much energy you give it, and
mm.
then how do you how do you find the opposite to
Yeah.
balance that? Yeah, it's really interesting. Mm.
Mm. So I'm thinking about people who are tuning in today, and they might be in a season where they sort of feeling really sort of stuck, and they've got these emotions that perhaps are negative, and they're struggling with them because it can
Mm.
be all consuming. It can be everything that comes in.
Yes.
It's you wake up and the circumstances haven't changed, and you go to bed that night and it's still the same. I guess I'm interested to know from the things that you've read around this idea that we can hold two things, we can have two kind of different states, opposing states at the same time.
Yeah.
How would we encourage people to sort of get curious about what that can look like in their
Mm.
life?
I think it's a really good question. I think what I would say is sometimes we can do this on our own, and sometimes we need to talk to others about it. But what would it look like to literally look at it from a different perspective? So if
Mm.
they have all these, I don't know if you've seen them, you can be presented with a picture of a woman. Some person it will look like an old lady, and to
Yes,
others it will look like
the young
a young
lady.
lady.
Mm.
If you look at there can be different ways of looking at things, and I would encourage people to try and separate some of the emotion and look at it from another perspective. Whilst at the moment it might feel like the worst thing that could ever happen, what may come from it? Is there anything you can identify that might come from it?
Mm.
And whilst it could be the hardest time in your life, is there anything where it's giving you life at that moment to try and see it in a different way?
Mm.
And some of the questions that I have been exploring is even for listeners to journal, if they journal or write it down around a time to, and
Mm.
it might be a time to cry about something, but then there might be a time to laugh about. So
Mm.
actually having some sentences that people can uh, work towards. Another one I liked here was a time to search for and a time
Mm.
to quit searching for. So sometimes we hold on to things and we're trying to move towards things, and sometimes we need to just let things go. Um, a time to keep something, a time to throw away
Yeah.
something. Another one I like is a time to be quiet about and a time to speak about.
Mm.
And I think sometimes just having a play with a time to, and like you said, Ali, things when things are, we're seeing them one way or we're thinking them as good and bad. What if we look at it from the opposite way, but also how much time do we want to give it?
Yeah.
Acknowledging the season,
Yeah.
but there might be a time to focus on this and there might be a time to move on.
Mm.
And just to explore some of those reflective questions, that would be my thoughts.
Yeah, for sure.
What about
When,
you? Have you got anything to
yeah,
add to that?
when you're talking about focus and a time, what sort of what we're focusing on and a time to
Yes.
focus, I remember going through a season with a beautiful girlfriend of mine, and when when she was in the middle of it, well, I feel like when we were in the middle of it, because I was right alongside her. I remember we were sitting in the car, and she was really quite, broken, and we'd had a big fat cry over it all. And I just looked at her and I
Mm,
said, one day we're going to be on the other side of this, and we're going
mm,
to look back and you'll have journeyed this, and there will be a way through. Because I said, there's one thing I know for sure, there's always a way through. Don't know what it's going to
Yes.
look like. And as that has unfolded and that has been, it is absolutely amazing because when you look back, you can see that the journey was exactly really how it needed to be.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about when you're in a season, if we focus on all of the impossibilities,
Mm. It's
it
hard to get
feels
through.
very
Yeah.
impossible. But if for a moment we can imagine that there's a possible way through, we don't have to know the details, but if we can begin to imagine it, I think that's
Mm.
sometimes where the paradox can come in because if it's possible, it stirs up just this little something and it allows
Seed of
our
hope.
eyes. It does. And then we're
Yes.
focusing on something, we start to see the choice that perhaps we didn't see before.
Mm.
I know
Yes.
that's why where my mind's going right now.
Yeah, I love that. And I also made me think about at that time, you spent a lot of time with your friend. You
Yeah.
journeyed with her. And I was thinking there's a time to, another one would be a time to spend time with and a
Yes.
time to not spend time with. And it might be that in this season, in someone's life, if they are going through a difficult time, is there someone that they need to spend more time with? And is
Yeah.
there someone or something they need to spend less time doing? And I think that's the thing. It's emerging, it's growing, and it will always change. But in
Yeah.
this season, what do they need to be spending time focusing on, like you say,
Yeah.
and time to spend less time focusing on something else or doing something else? I think that's really, it's something we can all take with us, I think,
Yeah.
on a daily basis. Where's our
Yeah.
focus?
Where's our focus? And that curiosity piece, not being
Mm,
stuck in, I feel this way, I should feel, because the whole shoulds and shouldn'ts, I shouldn't be
what's
doing this, I
good? What's
should,
bad?
bad,
Yeah.
all the extremes. It's about being curious and being okay and deciding that, okay, I feel like this and not denying it. Another
Yeah.
example is when we moved from Mount Isa, and I often talk about Mount Isa and our move to Townsville because it really was a difficult season. It was a
Yes.
difficult season for our whole family. And it almost seems silly now to say it, but I felt such grief in my heart
Yeah.
and I really struggled. And my whole language around that, and Kath pointed it out because she became my coach in this season. And I used to say, but I shouldn't feel like this. And she'd be like, but Al, like, shouldn't? Is
Yeah.
there a rule around? And so I think something that I've learned over the years is we're very quick to judge our thoughts and our emotions, very, very quick. But instead of judging, I think it's really exciting. And what you're bringing to this conversation today is this curiosity piece that we can feel one way.
There's a time to
There's a time
feel
to,
everything.
and
Yes.
even if there's also
Yes.
something else we can hold in our other hand. And that is just has such a beautiful picture to me that we can
Mm.
hold both. It doesn't mean it's
Mm.
easy.
No. But there's some freedom in that,
Yeah.
about embracing our whole being as well, I think.
Hmm.
Mm.
Wow. Is there anything else you think? Because I'm just thinking this is a great conversation. And I think, when Kath listens to it, she's going to go, right, there's more meat here. There's more conversation. Let's do some more around this.
We can do another follow-up. I
I
think
think
for
so.
me, there's probably even for myself, there's a lot
Mm,
to unpack. I want to listen to it again and go back, and I think there's some really good tools and some things that people can take away and just explore
for
some of what
sure.
they're going through in life.
Yeah.
And yeah, and nothing else for today has kind of blown my mind with lots of things we've shared.
Yeah, good. I feel actually a bit excited, less nervous and more excited now. Um,
Yeah,
Look,
there you
Joe,
go. Paradox. You're nervous and you're
paradox.
excited.
All at the same time. You know what? I've loved having this conversation today. I've loved getting to know you just that tiny bit more, in the lead up to this. And for anybody who's listened in and you want to have more time chatting with people like Joe, we do have our membership. We meet together once a month. We come
Mm.
together. We talk about the stuff that's really going on. Sometimes we could do a bit of coaching. Often we're all coaching each other with the things we bring to the table, but it's a really beautiful space. So I'll put the link in the show notes. But Joe, thank you so much for bringing your insight today. I think it's beautifully encouraging, and I can't wait to do this again sometime in the near future.
Thank you, Ali, for the opportunity.
All right. Have a fabulous week, everybody.